Greetings, YouTubers. You know, I love my Panasonic Lumix FZ1000. I've been using it for 4 years now. Wonderful 1-inch sensor, 4K video, you know, articulating back. It just does so many things. But, you know, it is a bit of a heavy camera when it comes to traveling, and I only do carry-on. So that 0 to 400 zoom lens, it's pretty nice. But, you know, this year, Panasonic came out with its smaller camera, which is the TS200, sometimes called the ZS200 in some countries. And, you know, the zoom is 0 to 360. It's almost the same as the FZ1000. And it's something that I can actually stick in my pocket. When you see the size of this thing, you can actually put it in your hand, hide it in your hand. It's amazing. The other thing is that it has a touchscreen back, which the FZ1000 does not have. Although it does not articulate, it allows you access to the menu items very, very quickly. And it does 4K video at the same resolution as the FZ1000. So you get those wonderful shots that you're going to pull frames out of if you want. It is a great little size. And you can see that I can actually stick it in my hand. And it is totally pocketable. So that kind of made a gap in my logic of cameras, in that I had now 0 to 360 zoom pocket-sized cameras, great for traveling, 4K video, 1-inch sensor, 20 megapixel images. Do I really need the FZ1000 anymore? Maybe I should get a new super zoom. So you may have seen my other video where I reviewed the Nikon P1000 3000 millimeter zoom lens. What an insane camera that is. Not impressed with the image quality overall, and its size is huge. Like, definitely not a carry-on in your carry-on bag camera. Nice for taking pictures of the moon, but okay, who does a lot of that? So I looked at FZ80. Now the FZ80 is 0 to 1200 meter zoom, which is probably all you ever want. And certainly, you know, when you get beyond that, you get into atmospheric turbulence and all kinds of other issues of stability. And the tripod stabilization is necessary. The onboard optical image stabilization has a hard time keeping up with it. The screen does not articulate, but it is touch sensitive, much like the ZS200. And it's a great little camera, and the logic sequence of the menu is pretty much the same as the other Panasonic Lumix line, so it's easy to learn it. So now it comes down to image quality. You're going to a 1 over 2/3 inch sensor, and what are the limits of that versus the benefits of the zoom? So that's what this video is going to be all about. I'm going to be reviewing, should I get rid of my FZ1000 and replace it with this smaller, lighter, longer zoomed, but potentially image quality less, 18 megapixels, still does 4K video, but are the limitations of that smaller sensor going to override the benefits of a long zoom? It's a bit of a long story. Hopefully the type of hands-on information I'm going through here is the kind of information that you will use in your decisions. And thank you for sharing this next few minutes with me. At replacing my FZ1000 with an FZ80. Well, some of the things that our FZ80 has: much bigger zoom, 1200 meter zoom. Has a touch screen on the back, although it's not articulated. It's much smaller to carry, and from a travel point of view, it would be that much easier. And it's almost half the price of the FZ1000. We'll talk about all these in much greater detail. What are some of the losses? Well, that 1 2/3 sensor is much smaller than 1 inch. The lens is slower, closes down to 5.9 at its low end. ISO and resolution is lower, and it only has a built-in mic. It does not have a mic port for an external mic jack. They do share some things though. They both shoot 4K video. You can pull 8 megapixel stills from that 4K video. Many internal features are the same in the menu. It has an excellent app, and it does great macro shots. Well, let's have a look. The FZ1000 came out in 2014. It has an articulating screen on the back, not touch sensitive, unfortunately. Many of the controls are accessed through customizable buttons in the menu wheel. A flash works to about 13.5 meters, and there's 2 switches on the side of the lens barrel to choose between focus zoom and optical image stabilization on and off. The FZ80 is a much smaller camera at 600 grams. The back screen does not articulate, but it does have touch sensitivity, which allows you to access many of the menu features. Again, a pop-up flash works up to 14 meters, quite nicely done. But all the features of the camera that you need to access really are through the touch screen and the menu together. It allows you to basically control every feature of the camera very quickly, scrolling through. It takes a few minutes to understand what all the settings are and how they work. But once you're into it, it's actually extremely useful. The form factor of the two cameras looks quite similar. When the lenses are extended, they're about the same length. But the FZ80, because of that smaller size, can get away with a lot less lens. The cameras are quite different on the back. The FZ1000's screen does not articulate, nor is it touch sensitive. The viewfinder turns on and off as your face approaches it. The controls for the camera are accessed through the menu wheel and the buttons on the back, giving you access to shutter, aperture, and exposure control. It works quite well and is quite efficient. Similar menu with some variations occurs on the FZ80. The difference though is that its back screen is touch sensitive, although it does not articulate. It has exposure control, f-stop control, and gives you a quick display of menu items that allows deep functionality into the menu of almost every single control that you need to take a picture. In addition, it gives you effects as well as Wi-Fi, shutter noise, and anything you may want to custom to it. Neither camera does manual focusing super well, but it's acceptable. I've put an audio file onto an iPad and we'll play it to both cameras. The FZ80 only has the built-in mic, whereas the FZ1000 also has a port that you can put in a jack for a mic. This is particularly useful when you're outside and there's wind noise. Wind noise is something that almost no bridge camera can get around. These ones aren't too bad. You can tell that it's not too much distortion going on here. In some cases, I'll just put an elastic band with a little bit of sponge or cloth over the microphone to stop the wind from whistling around the ports. The most expensive part of a camera to manufacture is the sensor, and they come in many sizes. The 1-inch on the FZ1000 brings in a 20 megapixel image with 120 square millimeters of capture area. The FZ80 is about 30 millimeters of area with that 1.2 inch sensor and an 18 megapixel image. That has a bearing on ISO, resolution, and the type of lenses that are optimized for it. If we look at low light capability of the two sensors, this is where we should start seeing some difference in dynamic gradient and noise. We're going to look at that dome on the top of that building. 400 ISO, both cameras are quite capable of doing that imaging quite nicely. It's a very slow shutter speed, though you'd need a tripod for that shot. So we get up to 800 ISO, still pretty hard to hand hold at an 1/8 or 1/10 of a second, but both cameras look pretty good. As we start pushing it now to 1600 ISO, the FZ1000 still looks good, but we're starting to see some distinct softening and a little bit of noise starting to show up in the FZ80. Double that ISO to 3200, we're distinctly seeing a degradation of the image quality in the FZ80 now, so we're starting to see its limits. It's still a handheld shot though at a 20th of a second or a 50th of a second. 6400 ISO, again, very significant degradation in noise in the FZ80. The FZ100 does a pretty good job of video at that, 3200 still. It's a little chattery, but it's very, very good shadow detail on that zoom. The FZ80 searches for a focus and does that a lot, quite annoying sometimes. I boosted this in Final Cut Pro, and still some shadow detail can be pulled out. The question is, if we edit into an image on that 20 megapixel sensor, is that as good as a zoom equivalent? Well, let's take it up to the maximum 400 here. This is the full optical zoom on the FZ1000. Now we'll extend that zoom 2 times internally. They call it intelligent zoom. And we'll take 1 frame out of that video and blow it up and compare it against a 2 times zoom that was done in Photoshop and see how that compares. It's basically the software inside the camera compared to post-production software, and it's a wash. I think they both look really good, very equivalent. Well, let's try pushing that a little bit more here. What if we take an image and really blow it up? We'll start with a 24 millimeter wide shot here. Look at that sailboat in the distance. Again, full zoom, 400 millimeters. We're going to double that to 800, again, the internal camera versus external Photoshop elements. And right now, I'd say that the camera digital zoom is doing a better job of it. Let's really blow it up this time to 1600 millimeter equivalent. If we put that into Photoshop Elements 19, I'm thinking that maybe it does a slightly better job. It's very, very close though, so there's a lot of detail can be pulled out of that image. Let's look at the FZ80 now. Start with our wide angle shot, a little bit of vignetting on the corners there. We're going to close in on the lighthouse on that rock. This is at 400 millimeters just to show what the equivalent would be between the FZ80 and FZ1000, and it's just coasting right now, and you'd think those two images would be pretty close. They look very close at this scale, but if we just take that lighthouse and blow it up, you see how the FZ80, how noisy that image is. It's got a bit of a granular look to it, even at 400 millimeters. The FZ1000 on the other hand is quite smooth. So right away, even though it may not have the zoom, the image quality is much better. We're at 1200 millimeters now, the full maximum optical zoom on the FZ80. We'll blow up that lighthouse, and you see that it's a little bit soft, and if we put the FZ1000 up against it, even with that level of blowing up, it's still really holding its own quite nicely, and it doesn't seem to have as much noise. Video at 2 times the digital extension of the 1200, 2400 mil equivalent. It's not bad. We can sharpen that up a bit in post and add some contrast to it because it does get washed out on that smaller sensor. It's a remarkable camera though, considering that zoom and that sensor overall. A really nice feature both cameras have is the free Panasonic Image app from the App Store. This app allows you to control either camera from an iPhone or other iDevice, and it hooks up quite easily over Wi-Fi. I've tried both the Sony and Canon and Nikon products, and none of them work quite as nicely and smoothly or as comprehensively as the Panasonic one. Most of the conventional camera adjustments are available on the screen here, and it's nice to have a live view of it immediately, showing exactly what it is that you've done and what you've set. If you also have the spare battery adapter for these cameras, you can leave them hooked up indefinitely at a subject and just use remote control to monitor it. It's great for bird watching or nature watching if you're in a spot where you don't want to necessarily physically be there all the time yourself. It's kind of nice too in that the screen is touch sensitive, so when you touch your iDevice, it'll actually launch that on the screen. Then you can download full-scale copies of those onto your iDevices. Works very, very well. Some of the other built-in functionality too, it's quite nice, is time-lapse, for instance. I would lock down as much of the exposure and ISO as possible, otherwise you get some of that jumpiness going on here. Here in the gray sky was much more even. You see how much smoother the time-lapse effect is on both, but it's a great thing. The FZ1000, that big sensor, it really pulls in the low light detail. Look at the grass in there. You see how much detail you see, and then the FZ80, not so much. It's hard to pull up that shadow detail. We'll look at that again. You can see the colors even and the textures in the grass. And with the FZ80, it kind of gets washed out a bit there. So you may be able to bring some of that back in post, but it's pretty tough to do that when the sensor's that small. Pulling single frames out of these videos is great though. You can do a lot with that and often see action that you missed trying to take a picture of it. Another example of pulling frames out of 4K video. We'll use both cameras on this helicopter moving along. And each individual frame in a 4K video is 8 megapixels. So if we pull one from the FZ1000 and then we pull one from the FZ80, the same shot, and we compare those two, we'll just lay them on top of each other here. We see that the quality of the two is almost identical, a little bit softer in the FZ80 as we've seen so many times, but very, very close. High speed, both cameras do high speed. It's full HD on the FZ1000, 1920 by 1080 at 120 frames a second. The FZ80 calls it HD, but in fact it's 1280 by 720, so a little bit of a smaller image. If you compare those two, they're both shot at 120 frames per second, but you can see there's a little bit of softness and chatter in the FZ80s versus the FZ1000 with that smaller sensor and smaller image size. If we close in closely on that, again, you can see that in the trees. Look at the leaves on the left. We drag that image across, look at the right, you can see there's just a little bit more blurred and a little bit more noise in the FZ80 frame. Not bad, but just not quite as good. Let's look at some night shots of that moon. FZ1000 wide angle, 24mm, beautiful lens. Not a lot of detail on that moon. If we take the FZ80, same shot, a little bit wider, 20mm. We're going to close in on that moon. That's pretty fantastic at 1200mm zoom. We can even double that in the camera to 2400mm, and you know, it's not a bad shot, and that's tripod mounted, so it's about as good as it gets. You can pull a single image out of that. That's fantastic. That is as good as a telescope. Okay, let's take these cameras out for a walk in the wild. These are nice macro lenses, as most cameras are nowadays, allowing you to focus within a couple of centimeters of the front lens, and then expand out to the 20 and 24mm wide angle lens. Under daylight conditions, and even these gloomy daylight conditions within the rain that we're having here today, both sensors are very adequate in terms of getting shutter speed and dynamic range that's required to get the shadow detail in these high contrast scenes. I must admit I do like the FZ1000's ability to go between the viewfinder and the back display seamlessly with your face, as opposed to having to select it with a button on the back of the FZ80. But the FZ80's touch focus on the back allows you to touch on the foreground and in the background and get some interesting shots. The high speed, of course, in both of these is a great option as well in a busy salmon stream like this one. So which way to go with these two cameras? Well, like many things, it depends on your situation. I find that most of my shooting is within 500mm, so I really don't need the extreme distance that this lens provides, but you may. I do a lot of video editing, and if you don't, then certainly 1080p is great for YouTube, and the quality of these videos is superb for just general purpose. If you do most of your shooting during the daytime, you really don't need to worry about that 1-inch lens or 1-inch sensor. You won't be using it, but if you do a lot of nighttime, you don't want to use that flash. The 1-inch sensor helps a lot. Ambient sound on the camera is all you're going to get on the FZ80. If you need studio quality or a very far distance, then you're going to need a microphone, and that you'll need the FZ1000 for. So the FZ80, I think, is probably the best value for a camera that you can buy. It's fantastic. The FZ1000 has a lot more heft with that 1-inch sensor. It gives you a bit more options in terms of dynamic range and the ability to edit down into the higher resolution. That little 2 megapixels actually seems to make a difference when it comes to cropping down into the images. But both do a superb job. At the end of the day, which one did I choose? Well, actually, I'm going to stay with the FZ1000 and use it as my studio camera when I need to get high quality audio with a microphone in. Hey, I appreciate all the time you spent watching this video. It's been a bit of a slog. I hope you've learned something. Thanks for watching.